In a short while, I will be joined by Lenny Kinsley, who is the spokesperson for the World Food Program in Sudan, and she'll be here to join us virtually from Nairobi to brief you on a new food security analysis for Sudan, which shows the highest levels of hunger ever recorded during the harvest season, and that's through October through February. Tomorrow, WFP, we'll continue with our WFP theme, and Carl Scow, the Deputy Executive Director, will be here in person to brief you on his visit to Gaza and WFP's latest assessment released on the humanitarian situation in Gaza. The Secretary General landed back in New York a short while ago. We expect him in the office tomorrow, hopefully not today. And in a statement issued earlier today, the Secretary General said that COP28, the climate change conference in Dubai, occurred at a decisive moment in the fight against the climate crisis, a moment that demands maximum ambition, both in the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions and climate justice. The issues of the energy transition, the future of fossil fuels were front and center. The Global Stocktake clearly reaffirmed the imperative of limiting global temperature rise to 1.5, which requires a drastic reduction in global greenhouse gas emissions in this decade, Mr. Guterres said. In addition, for the first time, the outcome recognizes the need to transition away from fossil fuels after many years with the discussion of this issue was blocked. To those who opposed a clear reference to the phase-out of fossil fuel in the COP28 text, the Secretary General said that a fossil fuel phase-out is inevitable, whether we like it or not. Let's just hope it doesn't come too late, he added. Of course, he said timelines, pathways, and targets will differ for countries at different levels of development, but all efforts must be consistent with achieving the goal of global net zero by 2050 and preserving the 1.5-degree goal. The Secretary General also said developed countries must be supported every step of the way. The era of fossil fuels must end, as it must end with justice and equity. Simultaneously, he added, COP28 agreed to commitments to triple renewable capacity and double energy efficiency by 2030. There was also progress in relations to adaptation and finance. The meeting also offered some other building blocks for progress, including the operationalization of the Loss and Damage Fund, even though financial commitments are very limited. Pledges to the Green Climate Fund now total a record $12.8 billion for the most climate-vulnerable communities. Over the next 2 years, governments are required to prepare new economy-wide national climate action plans. These plans must be aligned with the 1.5-degree temperature goal to cover all greenhouse gases. They must also be underpinned by credible climate policies and regulations, including a price on carbon, ending finance for fossil fuels. Both the preparation and implementation of these plans must be fully funded and supported. But much more is needed to keep the hope of 1.5-degree limit alive and deliver climate justice to those on the front lines of the crisis, he said. Many vulnerable countries are drowning in debt and at the risk of drowning in rising seas. It's time for a surge in finance, including for adaptation, loss and damage, reform of the international financial infrastructure. The Secretary General said he is working with the government of Brazil in its capacity as chair of the G20 to help advance these critical reforms. This will also be a major focus of next September's summit for the future. The world cannot afford delays, indecision, or half measures. He said he remains confident that despite many differences, the world can unite and rise to the challenges of the climate crisis. Multilateralism remains humanity's best hope. It is essential to come together around real, practical, and meaningful climate solutions that match the scale of the climate crisis. And a number of you had asked me about the UN's participation, about the upcoming talks between Guyana and Venezuela. I can tell you that the Secretary General welcomes the announcement of the meeting of the presidents of both Guyana and Venezuela that is to be held on December 14th in St. Vincent's and the Grenadines under the regional auspices of CARICOM and the Economic Community of Latin American Countries, CELAC. The UN, we did receive an invitation from the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines and the pro-tempore president of CELAC, Ralph Gonsalves, to attend the meeting as an observer. The Secretary General has asked his chef de cabinet, Courtney Rattray, who will be accompanied by Miroslav Jenča, the Assistant Secretary General for Europe, Central Asia, and the Americas. They will both participate as observers, and they will be heading down to St. Vincent's and the Grenadines shortly. The Secretary General commends the efforts by the President of Brazil, Luiz Inácio da Silva, and the Prime Minister of St. Vincent's and the Grenadines, Mr. Gonsalves, to bring the parties together and the support expressed by Mexico and the international community. The Secretary General trusts this meeting will result in an immediate de-escalation of the tensions and calls on the parties to settle their differences through peaceful means in accordance with the UN Charter and international law. As you know, the controversy is before the International Court of Justice, and the Secretary General does not take a position in relation to ongoing judicial proceedings. Turning to situation in Gaza, Lynn Hastings, our humanitarian coordinator for the occupied Palestinian territory, briefed your colleagues in Geneva today by VTC. She pointed to the need for a humanitarian ceasefire. Given the conditions on the ground, she emphasized that Israel needs to provide for unimpeded humanitarian access and to ensure that the conditions inside Gaza allow for the provisions of humanitarian aid. The Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs reports that the spread of diseases in Gaza has reportedly intensified, especially due to overcrowding living conditions, which adds a strain, obviously, on the increasing overwhelmed health system and increases the risk of people dying. Yesterday, the head of the WHO in the occupied Palestinian territory announced that cases of meningitis, jaundice, impetigo, chickenpox, and upper respiratory tract infections have now been recorded in Gaza. Yesterday, for the first time since the escalation from on October 7th, 8 trucks were screened at the Israeli-controlled Karim Shalom crossing and then allowed to enter Gaza through Rafah. While this should help alleviate some of the logistical delays, humanitarian agencies report this is not sufficient and are requesting that aid be allowed to transfer through Karim Shalom crossing. As of last night, 107 trucks carrying humanitarian supplies entered Gaza from Egypt or from Rafah, the same volume recorded most days since the resumption of the hostilities on 1 December. Also yesterday, some 129,000 liters of fuel and 45,000 kilograms of gas entered Gaza from Egypt. Turning to Ukraine, our colleagues on the ground and our humanitarian colleagues on the ground tell us that airstrikes on Kyiv this morning left dozens of civilians injured, including children. This is the third attack on Kyiv, Ukraine's capital, in less than 1 week. According to humanitarians on the ground, critical infrastructure in and at least 4 of the capital's 10 districts have been damaged, including homes, a hospital, and a kindergarten. Water and electricity systems were also hit, but authorities managed to quickly restore those vital supplies. Humanitarian partners have rapidly mobilized emergency assistance and distributed blankets and hot meals for hundreds of people. They've also provided psychosocial medical assistance and legal support, in addition to registering those impacted by the attack for cash assistance. Sites to help people stay warm have been set up, complementing the efforts of the authorities to find accommodations for people whose houses were damaged. Due to a cyber attack on one of Ukraine's largest mobile phone operators, millions of people are currently without access to an air raid warning system in the Kyiv region, but also in some parts of the north and the center of the country. That's what national authorities are telling us. Once again, we stress that deliberate attacks on civilian infrastructure are forbidden under international humanitarian law. That includes telecommunications and other infrastructure that help people to be informed and protected during times of war. This afternoon in the Security Council, Abdou Abari, the head of the UN Regional Office for Central Africa, will brief Council members on the situation in the region, present his reports. We'll try to share those remarks with you. Lastly, today in Geneva, in Switzerland, at the opening of the Global Refugee Forum, the High Commissioner for Refugees, Filippo Grandi, noted that 114 million represents the number of refugees and displaced whom persecution, human rights violations, violence, armed conflict, serious public disorder, have been forced from their homes. 114 million shattered dreams, disrupted lives, interrupted hopes. He said this is a figure that reflects a crisis, in fact, many crises of humanity. However, he added, it also represents the generosity and hospitality of the people who open their hearts and homes to those fleeing, people who often have little resources as those who've had to leave everything behind. The three-day Global Refugee Forum is being attended by some 4,000 delegates from 165 countries. I expect the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, to address them via video link on Friday. Edie, then Deji.
Thank you, Steph. The Israelis have said that they are allowing a humanitarian aid into Gaza. What is their objection to aid going directly through Kerem Shalom?
You'd have to ask them. I mean, we've been negotiating with them since really this crisis started. Right now, Kerem Shalom is being used just as a screening point, but the trucks still have to drive back kind of around the corner, if you look at the map, to Rafah. It would obviously save time, it would save money, it would save fuel, and it would increase the capacity if we could also have the trucks, offload at Kerem Shalom onto Palestinian trucks like we do in Rafah. We hope to see movement in that direction.
Secondly, there was a serious attempt by the Houthis today to send missiles against a ship in the Bab al-Mandab Straits loaded with jet fuel. This was apparently their first time to target a ship with fuel. Is this a concern to the Secretary General?
It's very much a concern to the Secretary General, not only in terms of the escalation of the conflict, but also, I mean, one can easily manage the environmental catastrophe should a fully loaded tanker with jet fuel explode at sea, with the devastating impact that would have on the ecology of the sea, and of course of the livelihoods of people who depend on fishing. I mean, it's in a sense it's what we've been talking to you about, the risk of regarding the Safra tanker. So it's concerning not only just on a geopolitical, strategic level, but also on an ecological level.
And are we going to get to see the Secretary General at a press conference before the holidays?
Well, let me first see him, and then I'll see if he sees you. Deji.
Yes, Steph. Just now you said 8 trucks were screened at the Israeli-controlled Kerem Shalom crossing and then allowed to enter Gaza through Rafah, while they should help alleviate some of the logistical delays. Yesterday, the Israeli ambassador also talked about, again, the logistic difficulties that may be caused from some reasons by the United Nations and its partners. Can you tell us what caused those logistical delays? What does that mean?
Well, first of all, there's a conflict going on that clearly has an impact. Second, we're trying to match or at least get to close to the level of the 500 trucks of goods that were coming in regularly into Gaza, both through the different crossings. Kerem Shalom being the main one for commercial goods. Rafah is more of a pedestrian crossing than a commercial crossing. So obviously, if we were able to have goods transit into Gaza through Kerem Shalom, it would alleviate a lot of the the backlog. And I mean, you or your colleagues asked me this question earlier this week. My answer hasn't changed. It's probably less elaborate the more the same question is asked. But the other challenge, obviously, is how quickly we can absorb goods going into Gaza, right? Because all the trucks have to be offloaded from Egyptian trucks right now onto Palestinian trucks, with the challenges of the fuel on the other side. So there are all sorts of logistical challenges. But I can tell you something, it is not from a lack of effort on our part.
So I was wondering, the UN is called for more opening up to humanitarian aids, more trucks to get into Gaza. But if you has already encountered such difficulties or in logistics, wouldn't it be even messier if we have more trucks getting there?
Deji, on this logic, I do not follow you.
Okay.
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 I don't. Yeah, I disagree with you. If we had more crossing, we would have more trucks.
Okay. So my second question. Yesterday, also the Israeli ambassador showed us the phone number of the leader of Hamas in Gaza. Has the UN tried to call that number?
I don't. I'm not in the habit of commenting
Because
on props used by ambassadors. We remain in contact with the de facto authorities.
But not that number.
But I don't know.
Okay.
Okay. Ibtisam, and then Michelle, and then Maggie, and then Sharife. That's as far as I can remember. Yeah.
A follow-up on the aid entering Gaza, or that's mostly not entering. But so you have this issue of the trucks that need to be inspected in other conflicts, like in Syria and the cross-border. And usually, if I'm not mistaken in that case, it was the UN, or there's a UN team that inspect that the trucks that went to different areas in Syria. Why is it that you don't have your team near Rafah that inspect these trucks instead of sending them to Karm Abu Salim and back? Why, like?
Because I mean, I don't think comparing our operations in Syria and Gaza, it's two different things, right? Here we have a conflict. One of the parties to the conflict is requiring them. They're requiring that they themselves inspect the goods that go into Gaza, which goods that had come in from Israel into Gaza previously had also been inspected. So we're just dealing with the structure that we've been dealt, right? We are not a member state. We are not Egypt. We are not Israel. We're not those in authorities in Gaza. We're just trying to make things work. We're trying to bring in as much aid as possible, given all the constraints that are imposed on us in a conflict.
I have another follow-up on the issue of the men that the Israelis arrested and stripped naked last Wednesday. According to social media and even some local reports, there were 2 UNRWA staff among these men. Can you confirm that?
I'm not able to confirm it. You should check with UNRWA, but I've seen these reports, which are extremely disturbing. But you should check with UNRWA. Michelle, then Margaret.
I don't believe we've had any response from the Secretary General on the resolution from yesterday. It was a big number, 153.
It was a big number.
Voted in favour of an immediate humanitarian ceasefire, which the SG's repeatedly called from. So what's his reaction?
I mean, I think it sends a clear message from the international community. As you say, the numbers were very high. For his part, the Secretary General will continue to advocate for and push for a humanitarian ceasefire in public and in private.
And 10 countries voted against it. What's his message to those countries, and what does he think that says?
I think every member state votes in whatever manner for whatever reasons. There were explanations of votes afterwards. So we're not going to send 10 messages to those 10 countries.
And yesterday, the US president described indiscriminate bombing in Gaza. Does the SG describe the military campaign
I mean, I
as
think
indiscriminate?
that is not far from the Secretary General's own words that he's been using. Ms. Bashir, Voice of America.
Thanks. Steph, in the monitoring of aid going in from Rafah and now, I guess, from Kerem Shalom, has anything turned up that has not been relief supplies in the inspections? Are you aware of?
I'm not aware, but that would be a question for those doing the inspections.
Well, if they had found something, wouldn't
Yeah,
they
I mean,
complain to you? I mean,
Me, Steph, I don't know.
But your
But I've
friends.
not, friends, yeah. I've not heard such reports.
okay, thanks.
Okay. Sharifa.
Thank you, Steph. I don't know if you've seen them, but there are reports based on witnesses that the Israeli soldiers killed women, children, and babies execution style at a school in Jabalia. And there seemed to be no sign of missile attacks around the school. So do you have any information on this incident?
I have not seen those reports. We have seen reports of an UNRWA school being destroyed, which I think we echo Mr. Lazzarini's strong condemnation of that. And as I think a number of you have asked about what will happen after the conflict. After the conflict, there will need to be a board of inquiry from the UN, which is look at the loss of property and the loss of UN lives. But those things can only happen after a conflict is ended.
Do you have an updated number on the number of schools that have been targeted?
I do not. You could check with UNRWA, though.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes, Dennis.
Good afternoon, Stan. You told about 500 trucks of goods that came every day to Gaza. Nowadays, commercial flow of goods is not possible. So does the UN have and its partners, does the UN have the opportunity to provide such amount of support on regular basis if such an opportunity would appear?
Well, I think when we've been talking about the rough figure of 500 trucks that went in, the majority of that, about I think 85%, were commercial goods, right? Because there was a commercial activity in Gaza, right? Items were being exported, items were being imported. So we can't replicate the commercial activity. We will try to send in as much humanitarian aid to help for the immediate help of those civilians who are continuing to live amidst very terrifying fighting. Margaret.
A follow-up on the compensation issue for Gaza, for the UN specifically. In 2009, Operation Cast Lead, the UN, a payment of $10.5 million was made by Israel to the UN for losses sustained by the UN after a Board of Inquiry investigation. Do you know if that was strictly for property damage, or does it include compensation for loss of lives?
I will have to check. I have faint recall, but I don't want to answer you without being sure. Okay, thank you. We will go get our, I was about to go get our guests, but hopefully our guest is connected.